I didn't realize how alone I was the day I was diagnosed with cancer. I realized it on Christmas Eve, lying in a hospital bed, watching my credit card balance climb while my son was nowhere to be found. My name is Elaine Carter. I'm 55 years old. And before I tell you what happened next, let me take you back to the moment this all began, when I believed that having cancer would bring my family closer, and discovered it did the opposite. I didn't find out I had cancer the day my doctor told me. I found out the night my son promised to stay and didn't. The hospital room was quiet in that way only hospitals can be. Not peaceful, just empty. The kind of quiet where every beep of a machine feels louder than it should, where the air smells faintly of disinfectant and something metallic you can't quite name. I lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks like they might distract me from the fear curling tight in my chest. Elaine Carter, 55 years old, mother of one, and, as of 3 days ago, a woman with stage 1 breast cancer. Early stage, the doctor had said, his voice careful but optimistic. Highly treatable. We caught it in time. In time. Everyone kept saying that phrase like it was supposed to calm me, like the word time hadn't suddenly become the most terrifying thing in the world. Dylan sat on the edge of the hospital bed when we heard the diagnosis. My son, my baby, even though he was 30 now. He reached for my hand so fast, I almost cried from relief. His wife, Marissa, stood beside him. Her arm looped through his, nodding along as if she'd rehearsed this moment. We're here, Mom, Dylan said, squeezing my fingers. You're not doing this alone. I'll take time off work if I have to. Marissa smiled, the polite kind that never quite reached her eyes. Of course, she added. We'll figure out a schedule. I'm good with calendars. I wanted to believe them. God, I needed to believe them. That first afternoon, they stayed long enough for the nurse to finish explaining treatment options, surgery, follow-up therapy, appointments that would stretch into months. Dylan asked a few questions. Marissa checked her phone. Then came the excuses. Subtle at first. We're just going to grab some coffee, Dylan said, already standing. The parking meter's almost up, Marissa added. They promised they'd be right back. They weren't. By evening, the light outside my window had faded into a dull gray. Dinner trays rolled down the hall. Laughter drifted in from somewhere far away, visitors saying goodbye, families making plans. I kept glancing at the door every time footsteps passed, expecting to see Dylan's familiar walk, the way he leaned slightly forward like he was always in a hurry. Nothing. When the nurse came in to check my IV, she smiled kindly. Your family stepping out for the night? Yes, I said automatically. The word slipped out before I could stop it. They'll be back. She nodded, the way nurses do when they've heard that sentence too many times. I didn't sleep much that night. Fear has a way of keeping your eyes open. Around midnight, I finally drifted off, only to wake up to voices in the hallway early the next morning. Dylan and Marissa were there, halfway out the door. Oh, Mom, you're awake, Dylan said, glancing at his watch. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. We have to run, but I'll come by later, okay? Marissa adjusted her purse strap. You're in good hands here, she said. And it's early stage. You'll be fine. She said it so casually, like she was talking about a cold. As they turned to leave, I heard her murmur to Dylan, not realizing the door was still cracked open. It's early stage, she whispered. She'll be fine. Let's not panic. The words hit harder than the diagnosis. Let's not panic. Because she wasn't the one lying in the bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how fragile a life could feel in just a matter of minutes. She wasn't the one thinking about mortality, about unfinished conversations, about whether fear could physically hurt. By the time the door closed, my chest felt tight, not from pain, but from something heavier. Disappointment, maybe. Or the slow realization that fear makes some people lean in and makes others step back. Later that afternoon, a nurse handed me a pamphlet about treatment schedules and transportation options. "Do you have someone who can drive you home after your first round?" she asked gently. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Yes," I finally said, though my voice sounded thin even to my own ears. "My son." She smiled and made a note on her chart. I watched her leave, then stared at my phone resting on the bedside table. No new messages, no missed calls. I told myself it was fine. Dylan had a job, a life, responsibilities. I didn't want to be a burden. I'd spent my whole adult life making sure my son never felt weighed down by me. But lying there, with the word cancer echoing in my head, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not all at once, just enough to notice. Cancer didn't just scare me. It introduced me to the truth quietly, gently, and far sooner than I expected. And I was beginning to understand that the hardest part of this journey might not be the disease itself, but discovering who would and wouldn't walk it with me. Cancer doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in slowly into your bones, your thoughts, your routines. By the end of my first week of treatment, I learned that the physical exhaustion was only part of it. The rest lived quietly in my chest, heavy and constant, like a question with no answer. The nurses were kind. They always are. They called me Han, adjusted my blankets, explained things twice when my mind drifted. The oncology wing smelled faintly of coffee and hand sanitizer, and every chair in the waiting room held someone pretending not to be afraid. Dylan texted every morning. "How are you feeling today, Mom? Let me know what the doctor says." I answered every message. I told myself that counted as being there. But texts don't sit beside you while poison drips into your veins. They don't notice when your hands shake or when you stare too long at the floor because you're afraid of crying in public. My first short walk down the hallway happened on a Wednesday afternoon. The nurse said moving a little might help with the nausea. I held onto the rail, inching forward, my body feeling heavier than it should have. Every step felt borrowed. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. In one of the rooms, the door was open wide. A man about my age lay propped up in bed, laughing softly. His wife stood beside him, spoon-feeding him soup from a thermos. Two teenagers sat on the couch, arguing quietly about whose turn it was to refill his water. "Dad, you need to drink," one of them said. The man smiled at them like they were the reason he was breathing. I looked away quickly, embarrassed by the tightness in my throat. I didn't want to stare. I didn't want to compare. But my feet wouldn't move. I stood there longer than I meant to, pretending to read a poster about hand-washing while something inside me cracked open. I wasn't angry. I was envious. Back in my room, my phone buzzed. "Dylan, running late at work. I'll try to swing by tomorrow." I typed back, "Okay," and set the phone face down. The next day came and went. No Dylan, no Marissa. On Friday, I finally worked up the courage to say what I needed instead of what I thought I was supposed to say. "I don't need you to fix anything," I told Dylan over the phone. I don't want to do this alone." There was a pause. Then he sighed. "I know, Mom. I'm trying. It's just a lot right now." "I understand," I said quickly. Too quickly. "I really do." Marissa's voice floated faintly in the background. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. "You can't keep missing work for this," she said, sharp and impatient. "She's stable. Don't let this become our whole life." My grip tightened around the phone. Dylan covered the receiver. "Marissa just worries," he said. You know how she is." I did know, and in that moment, I also knew something else. I wasn't a priority. I was a responsibility. The nurse came in later that afternoon to check my vitals. She was older, with silver hair pulled back into a low bun and eyes that had seen far too much loss. "You've got that look," she said gently. "What look?" I asked. "The one where someone's trying very hard not to ask for something they deserve." I laughed weakly. "I raised my son to be independent." She nodded. "Independence is good. Abandonment isn't." The words sat between us, heavy and undeniable. That evening, Dylan stopped by for exactly 12 minutes. I knew because I counted. He kissed my cheek, asked how I was feeling, and checked his phone 3 times while I answered. "I'll come with you to your scan next week," he promised, already halfway to the door. "I swear." After he left, I reached into my purse, looking for my credit card. I wanted something warm from the cafe downstairs, hot chocolate maybe. A small comfort. My fingers brushed over empty space. I checked again. Then again, slower this time. The card wasn't there. At first, I told myself I must have moved it. Maybe I'd put it in my jacket pocket. Maybe I'd left it at home. But a faint unease crept in, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly just enough to keep you from resting. That night, as the lights dimmed and the hallway quieted, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment from the past few weeks. Every promise, every canceled visit, every time Dylan had asked, "Can I use your card real quick?" I'd always said yes. That's what mothers do, right? Somewhere down the hall, a Christmas song played softly from a radio. It was still early December, but the decorations were already going up. Tinsel in the nurse's station, a paper wreath taped to the door across from mine. I closed my eyes and felt something shift inside me, not anger yet, not even suspicion, just the slow, sinking realization that being sick had stripped everything down to its truth. And the truth was this: being sick was lonely, but being forgotten, that hurt in ways no medicine could touch. By the second week, I learned the rhythm of the oncology floor better than I knew my own neighborhood. The soft squeak of nurses' shoes at dawn. The clatter of breakfast carts. The way the afternoon light slanted through the narrow window and landed on the same spot on the floor every day. Like it was marking time for me. Treatment days blurred together. Some mornings I woke up feeling almost normal, like the diagnosis had been a bad dream. Other days, the nausea hit before my feet touched the floor, and my body felt like it was moving through water. Dylan kept promising he'd be there. "I'll take you to the scan on Tuesday," he said one night over the phone. "I already talked to my boss." I let myself feel relieved. I even smiled, alone in my hospital bed, picturing him sitting beside me again, holding my hand like he had the day we heard the word cancer. Tuesday morning came. I showered slowly, every movement careful. I put on a clean sweater instead of the hospital gown, brushed my thinning hair, and packed my bag like I was preparing for something important. Because I was. I was preparing to feel less alone. At 8:15 a.m., I texted Dylan. "I'm ready." At 8:30, nothing. At 8:47, my phone buzzed. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Something came up at work. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I stared at the message longer than I should have. My first instinct was to type back, "It's okay." My fingers even hovered over the screen, trained by years of smoothing things over, of making myself smaller so my son's life could feel easier. Instead, I set the phone down. The nurse walked in a few minutes later. "Your ride running late?" "No," I said quietly. "I'll walk." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll go with you." As we moved slowly down the hall, she matched her pace to mine without saying a word. When we reached the imaging room, she squeezed my arm gently. "You know, she said. People don't always show up the way we expect, but that doesn't mean you don't matter. I swallowed hard. Sometimes it feels like I matter less. She met my eyes. Sometimes the people we love confuse comfort with obligation. They assume you'll be okay because you've always been okay. The scan itself was quick. Cold table, bright lights, instructions to hold my breath. I followed every command like a student who didn't want to disappoint. Back in my room, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. I reached into my purse, meaning to grab my credit card and order something warm from downstairs. Tea, soup, anything that didn't taste like metal. My fingers came up empty. I frowned and checked again, pushing aside tissues and receipts. The card wasn't there. A flicker of unease passed through me. Not panic, just confusion. I tried to remember the last time I'd used it. A week ago, maybe, when Dylan had stopped by and mentioned needing to order something online for the kids. "Can I borrow your card real quick?" he'd asked. "I'll put it right back." "Of course you can," I'd said, because that's what I always said. That evening, Dylan stopped by briefly, just like always. He asked about the scan, nodded at my answers, and kissed my cheek on his way out. "Sorry about this morning," he said. "I really am trying." "I know," I replied, and I hated myself a little for how easy the lie came. After he left, I called the nurse's station and asked if they'd seen my card. They hadn't. I checked my jacket pocket. Nothing. The unease grew sharper, turning into a thin thread of dread I couldn't shake. Later that night, the silver-haired nurse came in again to check on me. She noticed my restlessness immediately. "What's keeping you awake?" she asked. "I feel like I'm losing things," I said. "Not just my hair, not just my energy. Control." She sat on the edge of the chair and crossed her arms gently. "Illness has a way of doing that. It takes the wheel when you're not looking." I nodded. I spent my whole life being the dependable one, the one who made sure everything was handled. And now? And now I don't even know where my credit card is. She smiled softly, not dismissive, just understanding. "Maybe it's time you handle a few things for yourself." After she left, I stared at the ceiling again, listening to the distant hum of machines and footsteps. I thought about all the times I'd stepped in for Dylan without question. Rent, groceries, emergency repairs. "Just this once," he'd say. And I'd always believed him. The next morning, I logged into my bank app for the first time since being admitted. I wasn't sure what I expected to see. A mistake, maybe. A small charge I didn't recognize. Instead, the screen loaded slowly, like it was bracing me. I didn't look long enough to understand everything yet. I wasn't ready. But as I set the phone down, one thought settled firmly in my mind, heavier than fear, heavier than illness. I didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, I'd stopped protecting myself. And lying there, weak and alone, I realized something I should have learned years ago. Promises sound very different when you're the one waiting, and no one shows up. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the hospital had transformed itself the way it always did, quietly, politely, without asking whether anyone was in the mood to celebrate. A small, artificial tree stood near the nurse's station, decorated with paper snowflakes and strings of white lights. Someone had taped a crooked wreath to the door across from my room. Down the hall, a volunteer played soft Christmas music on a keyboard, the familiar melodies echoing gently through the corridors. Normally, I loved Christmas. I loved the predictability of it, the same songs, the same movies, the same recipes passed down and never written down. Christmas had always been my favorite excuse to gather people together. This year, I was gathering myself. My body felt weaker than it had a week earlier. The treatments were working, the doctor said, but healing was not a graceful process. My joints ached. My stomach turned at the smell of food. Even sitting up for too long made my head spin. Still, I tried to make the room feel less like a hospital and more like a place where a human being lived. I propped a photo of Dylan on the bedside table, the one from years ago, before adulthood had hardened his edges. I wrapped myself in the soft cardigan my sister had mailed from out of state, sprayed lightly with her perfume, lavender and soap. At noon, Dylan texted, "We'll be there tonight, I promise. We'll bring dinner. It won't be much, but we'll be there." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the older, more hopeful part, clung to it like a lifeline. "Okay," I typed back. "I'll wait." The afternoon passed slowly. Nurses checked in. A doctor stopped by to review my chart. The volunteers' music drifted in and out, fading as the sun went down. At 6 o'clock, I adjusted my pillows and sat up straighter. I didn't want Dylan to walk in and see me slumped, looking as tired as I felt. 7 o'clock came. At 7:15, a nurse peeked in. "Expecting visitors?" "Yes," I said. The words still felt automatic. She smiled. "That's nice." 8 o'clock. I watched families pass by my door. Some carried wrapped gifts. Some carried bags of takeout. Laughter followed them like warmth. At 8:30, my phone buzzed. "Running a little late," Dylan wrote. "Traffic's bad." I nodded to myself, as if he could see me. Of course. It was Christmas Eve, 9 o'clock. The dinner tray arrived: turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans that had lost their color. I picked at it, telling myself I'd eat later, after Dylan arrived. After we laughed about how ridiculous it was to celebrate Christmas in a hospital room. 10 o'clock. The volunteer played Silent Night. The irony stung. At 10:30, another message. "I'm so sorry, Mom. Something came up. We can't make it tonight." I felt it before I read it. That familiar drop in the stomach, like missing a step on the stairs. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say that I hadn't already said a dozen times in my head. By 11, the hallway quieted. Visiting hours ended. Doors closed. Lights dimmed. I turned on the television and let a Christmas movie play softly in the background, the kind where everything works out in 90 minutes and love is always enough. I sat there alone, wrapped in my sister's cardigan, listening to fake laughter and canned applause while my dinner went cold. For the first time since my diagnosis, I cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Just tears slipping quietly down my cheeks, soaking into the pillow before I could stop them. I wasn't crying because I was sick. I was crying because I was alone, and the people who said they'd be there had chosen not to be. Sometime after midnight, as I was turning off the TV, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a notification from my bank. "Unusual activity detected on your credit card." My heart skipped. I opened the app, my hands suddenly steady in a way they hadn't been all day. The screen loaded slowly. One charge, then another, then another. Department stores, online retailers, a hotel booking, a total climbing higher with each line item. The balance crept closer and closer to the limit, like it was daring me to look away. I stared at the dates. December 24th. December 24th. December 24th. Christmas Eve. My chest tightened not with pain, but with recognition. I didn't need to see the name attached to the account. I didn't need to call anyone to confirm it. I knew exactly who had access to that card, exactly who had borrowed it just for a minute. Dylan. While I sat alone in a hospital room, fighting nausea and fear and disappointment, my son had been shopping, planning, spending. The realization didn't come with rage. It came with a strange, hollow calm. I thought back to Marissa's voice in the hallway. She'll be fine. I thought back to every promise Dylan had broken. Every time I'd said, it's okay when it wasn't. I locked the phone and set it on the table beside me. The Christmas lights in the hallway blinked softly, oblivious. I whispered into the empty room, my voice barely audible even to myself. So, this is what you chose. And in that moment on Christmas Eve, under fluorescent lights, with a body still learning how to heal, I understood something with painful clarity. The cancer hadn't taken my strength, but the silence had, and I was done pretending not to hear it. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the machines or the pain or the beeping in the hallway, but because something inside me had finally gone quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a truth settles in. At 1:12 a.m., while the rest of the floor slept, I called the number on the back of my debit card. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. Yes, I told the representative calmly. I need to freeze the card immediately. I didn't authorize those charges. She asked a few routine questions. Date of birth, last 4 digits, recent transactions. I'm in the hospital, I added, not for sympathy, just for clarity. And I'm not shopping. I understand, she said gently. The card is now frozen. No further charges will go through. When the call ended, I sat back against my pillow and stared at the ceiling. I expected to feel guilty, panicked, regretful. Instead, I felt lighter. As if I'd set something down I'd been carrying for years without realizing it had weight. The next morning, my phone exploded. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails stacking up faster than I could listen to them. Mom, my card isn't working. Hey, something's wrong with the account. This is really bad timing. Can you call me ASAP? I took my time. I brushed my teeth. I drank some water. I watched the sun climb slowly through the narrow hospital window. At 9:47 a.m., Dylan called again. I answered. What did you do? He demanded, skipping hello. The cards declined everywhere. I froze it, I said evenly. There was silence on the line, then a sharp breath. You froze it? He repeated. Mom, are you serious? It's Christmas weekend. We're in the middle of... I know exactly what weekend it is, I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. That surprised me too. I was alone in a hospital room while you were spending my money. You're overreacting, he snapped. We were going to tell you. We just needed it temporarily. Temporarily? I echoed. Dylan, the balance is almost maxed out. That doesn't mean anything, he said quickly. I'll pay you back. You know I always do. I closed my eyes. No, I said softly. You don't. What is that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending this is normal. Marissa's voice cut in through the speaker, sharp and irritated. Elaine, this is really unfair. You know we're under a lot of stress. I felt something firm settle in my chest. Not anger. Resolve. I'm under stress too, I said. I have cancer. There was a pause. Then Dylan sighed. Why are you doing this now? I thought about that question for a long moment. I'm not doing this now, I said. I should have done it years ago. I ended the call before he could respond. The rest of the day passed quietly. A nurse helped me walk a little farther than before. Another patient smiled at me in the hallway. Someone left a small paper snowflake on my tray with a handwritten note. "You're not alone." That evening, I started writing things down. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The first time I helped Dylan with rent, the car repair that turned into a down payment, the groceries, the emergencies, the just this once moments that never stayed once. I didn't write numbers at first, just memories, patterns, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. The next day, Dylan showed up in person. No warning, no apology, just frustration wrapped in familiarity. "You embarrassed us," he said as soon as he walked in. "The hotel tried to run the card again. It was declined." "You embarrassed yourself," I replied. "You left your sick mother alone on Christmas." "That's not fair," he said, running a hand through his hair. "You know I love you." "Loving someone means showing up," I said quietly. "Not just when it's convenient." He didn't have an answer for that. Over the next week, I made changes. Real ones. I updated passwords, opened a new account, asked a social worker about support groups, started saying no without explaining myself. And slowly, very slowly, I felt myself coming back. Dylan's calls shifted in tone. Anger softened into frustration. Frustration turned into something like shame. One afternoon, after days of silence, he sat beside my bed and finally broke. "I messed up," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't realize how bad it was. I looked at him, the man he'd become, the boy he used to be. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." That night, I stood in the bathroom and studied my reflection. My hair was thinner, my face paler, but my eyes looked different, clearer. I hadn't canceled a credit card. I had canceled a pattern, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I was finally choosing myself. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It never does. Some days, I woke up feeling strong, like my body was finally cooperating. Other days, the fatigue came out of nowhere, heavy and stubborn, reminding me that recovery, physical or emotional, doesn't move in straight lines. But something had changed. I was no longer waiting. The treatments continued, and slowly, the numbers began to look better. "You're responding well," my oncologist said during one visit, smiling in a way that felt earned. I nodded, grateful, but I knew the real progress wasn't just happening in my body. It was happening in my choices. Dylan didn't disappear after our last conversation. To his credit, he didn't pretend nothing had happened either. The calls came less often, but when they did, they sounded different, slower, more careful. One afternoon, he asked if we could meet somewhere outside the hospital. "Just coffee," he said, "if you're up for it." I was. We met at a small cafe near the park, the kind with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus. I arrived early and chose a table by the window. When Dylan walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. He sat down and didn't reach for his phone. "I started therapy," he said, almost immediately. "Marissa and we're working through some things, mostly me." I waited. "I didn't realize how much I was taking," he continued, his voice unsteady. "Not just money, time, energy. You always made it so easy, Mom. I thought that meant it didn't cost you anything." I stirred my coffee slowly. "It cost me more than you knew," I said, "and more than I admitted." He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that wants things fixed right away. The kind that knows it can't be." That mattered. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a process, one that required honesty more than comfort. "I forgive you," I said finally. But things are different now. I know, he said. They should be. He didn't ask for the card back. He didn't ask for money. Instead, he slid an envelope across the table. It's not everything, he said, but it's a start. Inside was a check. Small, humble, real. That night, back in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror and studied myself. My hair had grown back in soft patches, shorter than it had ever been, framing my face in a way that felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. I looked older, stronger, like someone who had lived through something and hadn't disappeared because of it. I joined a support group for women going through cancer treatment. On Tuesday nights, we sat in a circle of folding chairs and shared stories we hadn't told anyone else. We laughed more than I expected. We cried less than I feared. I started walking in the mornings, just around the block at first, then farther. I learned the names of my neighbors, the rhythm of my own breath. For the first time in years, my life wasn't arranged around someone else's needs. Dylan and I met for coffee a few more times over the next months. We talked about safe things, weather, books, the park. Slowly, carefully, we talked about harder things too. I never gave him my new card number, and he never asked. One afternoon, while we sat watching ducks gather near the water, he said quietly, "You seem lighter." I smiled. I am. Because I had learned something cancer hadn't meant to teach me, but did anyway. Love doesn't mean losing yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you choose when to open. On the anniversary of my diagnosis, I did something simple. I bought myself a small Christmas ornament, even though it was spring. A glass one, clear and unbreakable looking, with light catching inside it. I hung it in the window. Not for anyone else to see, just for me, because I survived cancer. And I survived learning that I deserve to be cared for too. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to choose me. I already had.